thanks to VIP for inviting me to this. And yeah, let's kick things off, I guess. So just for today's talk, give you a brief overview of who we are, a bit of history around the Sun web product. Then I'll dig into Helios, a few things that we learned from delivering the project, what would change, and where we go next. And so to give you a view of what News UK is and who we are, what we do is that we tell stories. And the Sun specifically is a tabloid media publication under the News UK banner. We have a print and digital form. Our print goes out to about 1.5 million people every day. And digital, we get about, on average, 5 million uniques a day and about 50 million page views. So, you know, traffic-wise, it's quite high traffic. So, well before I started back in 2015, the Sun ran with a combination of Method and eScenic, CMSs that, from what I've heard, were quite difficult to work with. And the Sun was also running behind a paywall. Being behind the paywall had a huge impact on their ability to grow. So around November 2015, they removed the paywall to increase traffic to the website and grow revenue. And then in June 2016, the Sun was migrated to WordPress VIP. And with the migration to VIP, we started to see significant improvement in performance and traffic. So this is a ComScore graph. And so we measured our performance after we moved to VIP by monitoring our ComScore rating. ComScore is an industry-recognized auditor of web traffic for media publications, as well as other digital platforms. And what you'll see is that, you know, we started out here when we first moved to VIP. And then in about 6 months' time, going into January 2017, we moved ourselves up to second place, just behind our competitors, the Daily Mail. And then alongside ComScore as well, we tracked our website traffic, and you can see the significant growth, you know, just by moving to VIP that it had on the platform. And you know, we almost doubled in size within 6 months. We used, you know, it wasn't just the VIP platform, but we also had a quite aggressive SEO strategy, and all of that together really set ourselves up and to go, you know, to grow. With everything positive that was happening, you know, going into January 2017, and being in an extremely competitive market, we wanted to continue our growth, and we looked further into how we could do that. The business had some core problems that they wanted to solve. So we wanted to be able to innovate and build capability to move faster. Pretty much the same as our editors, you know. We wanted to be able to move as fast as our editors could. The time to market for commercial incentives and the flexibility to maximize ad revenue was difficult where we were. And then from a technical strategic point of view, we wanted to grow and scale and ensure we did in a cost-saving way. So with sort of the problems in hand, we set about creating some goals that we believe would help us achieve what we wanted to. So the first thing we wanted to do is we wanted to build a componentized client view that was decoupled from WordPress. We wanted to increase our release cycle times by building small testable components and iterate faster on our changes by using continuous deployment and integration technology. We wanted to create a shareable library of client and server functionality that we could repurpose across other platforms and applications within the Sun domain. We wanted to increase traffic to our site, improve our SEO and user engagement. And finally, we knew if we could do most of the above, then we would also be increasing our bottom line. With those problems to solve and goals to achieve, we created a few KPIs to make sure that we could measure ourselves on this journey. So what we looked at was page speed. Everyone knows what page speed is, speaks for itself. Time taken for all the components on to load on the page, including third-party scripts. We then measured time to first paint, the point at which something on the page is displayed to the user. And this indicates really to the user that the page is loading. And the other thing we measured was server response time. This is the time taken for the server to respond to a browser request. The quicker this is, the quicker the user will start to see content on the browser. Now, in order to achieve these goals and reach our KPIs, we sort of took inspiration from this fella. Does anyone know who this is? Yes? No? No? All right. This is Helios, the god and personification of the sun in Greek mythology. And in all truthfulness, he didn't really inspire us. We just used his name for our project. Helios was our idea of decoupling away from our front-end user experience from WordPress. The editorial team would continue to use WordPress as their primary tool for creating news articles. Then using a RESTful API, the content could be served to our readers via a JavaScript application, which would render the output from the API into HTML using a modern application framework. At its core, what this architecture allows is the flexibility of developers to be innovative. You can future-proof the website, implementation without re-implementing the CMS. You have full control over the user experience using native tools, and you can gain performance improvements by streamlining the backend and shifting display logic to the client side. Our first milestone was to focus on where we could gain the most value out of moving to a headless CMS. It made sense that since the core of our traffic was direct to our article pages, that we'd build Helios to serve article pages and would leave the section and index pages being served by WordPress. So how did we go about building Helios? We first created a cross-functional team whose main task was to focus on the build of Helios. So the usual suspects: product owners, business analysts, project managers, full-stack developers, architects, a DevOps, and a QA function. For client-side rendering, we chose React. This was in line with the technical strategy that News UK had set out. It would also allow us to componentize our UI and share these components between our other Sun projects and across News UK platforms. Along with React, Node was our server-side choice of technology. This would also ensure that JavaScript was used across the stack, which unifies the language and the data format, allowing us to essentially reuse developer resources. Both React and Node are extremely popular in the open source, they're extremely popular open source frameworks with a thriving community around them. With both these technologies written in JavaScript, it meant that we were working with the most popular development language in the world, which made attracting and retaining talent easier. Everyone loves a fancy architecture diagram, so I've drawn one for you. What we've got here is this models the flow of a request that the user makes to the sun.co.uk website within our architecture for Helios. So the request first hits Akamai. I don't know where the laser pointer is on this thing. Yeah, here we go. So the request first hits Akamai, our CDN, where we cache articles and other pages. We've got various caching rules stored in Akamai based on the type of page that's been served. If the article isn't cached, Akamai will route the request depending on the page being served. So article pages will go into our Elastic Beanstalk setup, and section and topic pages get routed directly to WordPress VIP. So by using Elastic Beanstalk, we don't have to worry about load balancing, scaling, and monitoring. It's all taken care of out of the box. pretty much. So we use Elastic Beanstalk to host Helios. And Helios is just a Node.js app packaged inside a Docker container. That Docker container is deployed to EC2 instances, which have Nginx running in front of them. Nginx routes the requests based on HTTP status. So if Helios is unable to serve a page, we will route back to VIP in order to serve that content. All requests that hit Helios here will be routed to our Varnish caching container. And what we do, so what this caching container does is it stores the page data as well as data from our third-party providers. This cache is long-lived and is updated when the article is updated in WordPress via our cache clearance service. That's this little beast here. The cache clearance service is used to ensure that we're serving the latest version of our articles to our users. On add or update of an article in WordPress, a request is posted to the cache clearance service. And these requests are pushed onto a queue, which processes the request and clears the cache on various systems within the Sun architecture. So these caches include Akamai and our API cache, which is here. It also sends a request to Helios in order to fetch the article, in order to reduce the amount of time it takes to render. So that's sort of a high-level view of how we've built the architecture for our headless CMS. And now I'll go into how Helios actually takes the data from the WordPress API and how we render it out to our users. So when a valid request for an article comes in, if it's not cached in the Varnish cache, a request is sent to the WordPress API, which returns the data for a specific article. The data is returned in a JSON format, and the data we take out of that is the raw content object. This raw content object is just a string of text that's representing the content that editors put into WordPress. It's the same content that you'll see if you click on the text tab. We made a change to the WordPress API in order to return this field, as it wasn't in the original specification when we first started this project. We then take this raw content and we convert it to HTML so that we can massage it in a format that we can display to our users. We parse the raw content using a JavaScript library into HTML. And along with this, what we do is we replace the shortcodes with custom X tags. And what I mean by custom X tags is that we convert the shortcodes into HTML tags. And what you end up with is a whole bunch of HTML, which we then parse into an HTML tree. The benefits of parsing into a tree is that we can now traverse the tree in our code. So in that tree, we can inject some specific HTML into various parts. And it's portable, and we can easily cache it as JSON. So some of the objects that we inject are things like an advertising block, which we can throw in at every fourth paragraph. Another thing that we can do is one of these sort of rails. We call these rails. So that's up-to-date related data or up-to-date related articles related to the article that you're viewing. The final piece of the puzzle really involves mapping this HTML tree into React components. So for every node in the HTML tree that we have, there's a corresponding React component in this component library. This component library is a shared library of components that are rendered in React. Each of the components in this library are a replica of those in WordPress that the editors use to create articles. The component library also has components to build the furniture around the articles, such as the header and the footer. To test and develop these components in isolation, we use React Storybook, which is a development environment for UI components. This allows us to build quickly without having to worry about application-specific dependencies. Helios-specific components, such as our header, allow us to provide functionality which behaves different to what is rendered out of WordPress. For example, in Helios, we have introduced a burger menu and a breadcrumb in our mobile viewpoint. The benefits of our component library allows us to make changes like this often and fast, which means that we can test, measure, and iterate efficiently. After mapping the tree to React components, the final structure is then rendered out to HTML using the standard React mechanism. Along with this, we then cache the article at Akamai for 30 minutes, and then we invalidate that cache if the article is updated to ensure that we serve the latest version to the client. And in a nutshell, that's pretty much how Helios works. It's fairly simple. There's not much to it. After we delivered Helios, we measured sort of the KPIs that we set out. The KPIs around page load speed, time to first paint, and server response time all sort of fell in our favor. We decreased the page load speed, we decreased the time to first paint, and we improved the server response time. Along with those KPIs, we also looked at the bounce rate. So the bounce rate's the percentage of visitors that navigate away from the website after viewing a single page. And across the core of our sections, what we noticed was a general decrease in bounce rate here. Along with bounce rate, we also looked at sort of user engagement, so the average page views per visit. And this also increased over time. Having set up an agile way of working, our release cycles have improved, and we're now releasing multiple times a day. We have multiple teams working on various components at any one time. For example, one of our teams is working directly in the newsroom. And so what they do is they will build special components for stories that we know are coming up. Things like widgets for elections, heat maps, graphing components. And now with the Football World Cup coming up, they're working on a whole bunch of specialized widgets for the Football World Cup. And now that our technology stack is, well, for the front end, is completely JavaScript, we can bounce ideas and share knowledge within our counterparts, not just in News UK, but globally across News Corp. We can easily rotate talent between our brands and ensure talent retention by creating an environment that's easy to transition around. To ensure that we could effectively measure performance on the sun.co.uk, we integrated New Relic right from the first day of deployment. This enabled us to monitor performance and react to any issues that we found, especially during our initial release of Helios. Caching. Now, caching was quite tricky for us. As you can see from the diagram I presented, we really had to take a step back and think about how we could effectively cache in order for us to do things like legal kills, which means if someone complains, we've got to take an article down, and how we would make sure that we'd give our readers the most up-to-date news and maximize performance. So we had to design a very bespoke caching mechanism to clear the caches in particular order. One of the other things that we learned was to not be afraid of change. Now, when the team first started to build Helios, most of the developers in the team had used a framework called Happy as sort of their Node.js framework because it was common to them. However, as we grew and new developers came into the fold, not only was, and as we sort of worked through Helios and the delivery of it, not only was Happy it started to become very complicated to build what we needed to do through Happy. So the guys pivoted and went and built sort of everything else in Express. Now, also by moving to Express, it's functional and it's easier to unit test. It's also hugely popular and well supported in the development community. And when you're building Node.js, they recommend that you use Express as well. The other thing we learned, and we learned this quite hard, is not to underestimate the complexity in working with multiple vendors. So our integration with Akamai in front of WordPress VIP was very much underestimated. Issues around configuration and networking mostly on the Akamai side, ended up taking a lot longer than we expected. And one of the issues that we did come across was a particular bug in Chrome which prevented WordPress from the WordPress customizer from working properly. And it wasn't until we had Akamai, Google, and VIP talking together that we discovered, or that the issue was discovered and it was remedied. And you know, these sort of things, you really cannot underestimate them. We sort of needed to have done the Akamai work well before we started Helios. A few of the things that would change. We needed to break away from WordPress a bit earlier than we should have when we started to build Helios. What we found ourselves doing is copying CSS direct from WordPress into our component library, and therefore bloating it with CSS that's unused. You know, still to this day we have loads of CSS that's completely unused, and you know there are technical debt tickets to go and remove them. But when you're working to sort of tight deadlines, that was unfortunately one of the things a mistake that we've made. The other thing as well is when we built Helios and a component library, we set them up as two separate GitHub repositories. And every time we make a change to the component library, we need to release Helios because there's a core dependency on that library. So it forces us to deploy Helios in every change, which isn't really efficient. And what we are looking to do, and I'll talk about this shortly, is that we want to move to a single repo just to save this complication. We also didn't really have a good foundation in place when we started Helios. We had no CI/CD in place, and the WordPress API also needed to be extended in order for Helios to update the data. Sorry, in order for Helios to obtain the data, it needed to render out pages. If we had done this work up front before Helios kicked off, we may have delivered it earlier. The other thing as well is when we were selling the idea of Helios to the business, we focused on the delivery of article pages, and we didn't emphasize enough how much we should have got buy-in to also do our section and index pages. And so, you know, even to this date now, our section and index pages are still being served out of WordPress. Going forward, you'll be happy to know we continue to work on Helios. With the World Cup coming up, we've actually done our first bespoke custom page that's going to be served out of Helios. The other thing is we're looking into how we merge our component library and Helios into one single repo to just make us a bit more efficient in our delivery. We're looking at how we can pre-render articles once editors write them. So for example, pre-rendering the article, storing it in cloud storage somewhere, and enabling sort of a better user experience by not having to sort of render on the fly. And of course, we're going to be looking into Gutenberg and how that fits in with the rest of the architecture that we have with the new editing tool. And you know, it's not just a tool. There's a different way of working as well. And that's it. So thanks for your time. I'll open the floor to any questions if you have any.